Hi, I'm going to be talking about what the Supreme Court did yesterday, having to do with Trump's appeal about his claim to be immune from any prosecution. Uh, I'll be talking about the ins and outs of that. Less than was on my mind last night when I composed this title of that I feel sick about what the Supreme Court just did, and more about how it fits into the big picture. The big picture having to do with some such questions as will Donald Trump be held accountable? Uh, what is going to be the outcome of this battle between Donald Trump and the rule of law? And what does it mean for the prospects of our getting another Trump presidency? Those are the Trump issues. But also equally important is our issues having to do with what does this show us about the state of the Supreme Court today? And the state of today's Supreme Court is really quite distressing, something which is not nearly enough talked about. I heard a lot of the people that I respect greatly talking about yesterday's decision that the Supreme Court's going to hear this thing and that they're going to basically extend the time to delay the possibility of Trump actually being brought to trial on these issues having to do with the most serious crimes in American history. A president of the United States committing crimes to try to overturn the results of an election that was clean and clear and conducted according to the Constitution. It was a major assault on American democracy of the kind I don't believe we've ever had. I don't count the Civil War as being of that kind. So that was the situation that we had last night, and I've heard Neil Katyal and Andrew Weissman and Lawrence Tribe, three of the giants of American legal thinking in these times, talk about this. And there's a lot you can say about the ins and outs, but the essential thing is here that the Supreme Court has, for no good reason that I can imagine. I'm not saying for no reason, we'll get to that, but for no good reason, have decided to help Donald Trump escape justice, helping him with the thing that has been his continuous effort to delay everything he can in every way he can. One should know that the issue before the Supreme Court of the immunity that Trump's lawyers are claiming that he has, it is completely bogus. I mean, it is not a serious assertion. It is not a difficult issue. It is not something that the Supreme Court needs to take months to do. But that's true of all of Trump's. You've got with Trump's various appeals, everything gets appealed in every way possible. He loses. He loses all the time. But at the same time, he's always winning because he's got no legal arguments. His guilt is clear. The people prosecuting him will be able to convince any honest jury of his guilt. There's really no question about those things, at least not in my mind. I follow these things closely. But what he wants to do is to delay things. So every appeal is successful to the extent to which it delays things. This particular appeal, our brilliant prosecutor, Jack Smith, has made every effort to argue that it should be handled as quickly as possible. I mean, we know the Supreme Court can do it quickly. They did it quickly in Bush v. Gore as a matter of just days. They did it quickly when it was Nixon versus the United States, and the Supreme Court quickly said that Nixon had to turn over the tapes. They can do it. And Jack Smith has argued quite compellingly that this is a situation where that is really what's required. We need speed, not so that, to compromise justice, but in order for the public's interest to be met. The public has a need and a right to know what the candidate for the presidency of one of America's two major parties has or has not done, according to a jury of average Americans who will have heard the case. He'll be convicted if it's an honest jury. And that will be a unanimous decision by a group of jurors. But what the Supreme Court did yesterday was to to abet Trump in his efforts to delay. Now, why would Trump want to delay? Couple reasons. One is, if he can win the election, he can kill federal cases against him. And he probably would. The other reason that he wants to delay it is he wants people to vote without having had all of his crimes exposed in the way that a trial would expose them. I think you could see that the January 6th committee, when it did an excellent job of exposing his crimes, did move public opinion. So he's got more chance to win the presidency the more he can delay trials so that they can't produce a verdict, at least, and maybe can't even be conducted before the election. And then if he gets to be president, he can kill the cases. I mean, Donald Trump has blown my mind with the extent to which he is adept at getting away with things. And one of the big battles here in America today has got to do with this particular juxtaposition of two main forces. One is the rule of law, and the other is this lawless guy who might get his way back into having in his hand the powers of the presidency, which he's telling us how he's going to use, and it's not in accordance with the rule of law. In his hands, he's being quite out front. The rule of law, as when he's president, will mean the rule of a weapon in the hand of the most powerful person in the country. He claims immunity, meaning that he is above the law. And Neil Katyal has been bringing that out again and again. I mean, I watch these things enough so that I can tell when somebody's got an idea, they think this is the one I got to stress. Neil Katyal is going through the history of all the things that Trump has said during impeachments and after impeachments and this and that, and the constant refrain of all of them is, well, whatever the circumstances are, I'm above the law. So this is an issue we've got that the Supreme Court asked to speed this thing up, to take it directly without involving the Court of Appeals. And his reason for that wasn't that he didn't think he could do fine in the Court of Appeals. He filed there too. The reason was he wanted this done as fast as possible. Well, I mean, all this should have taken place sooner. We've got Merrick Garland. Everybody's now saying, oh, it would have been good if he had started this whole thing a couple years earlier. But that's a whole nother subject. But it does have to do with why the good guys find themselves in this situation where a president of the United States has attempted to pull off a coup d'etat, incited an insurrection, and there's a real chance that this guy will be able to delay the rule of law holding him accountable long enough for him to be able to go to the polls never having been convicted of one of these very serious crimes. There's no good reason for the court to have done this that I can think of. And yesterday when I was listening to these people I greatly respect on these legal matters, I wanted to be the interviewer, and because none of them were ever saying anything about what does it mean that the Supreme Court's doing this. I mean, they talked a lot about the consequences, but they didn't talk about the meaning. They didn't talk about what it says about the Supreme Court. But then at the very end of Lawrence Tribe's appearance on another Lawrence O'Donnell's show, the very last thing he said was basically, there's no reason to do this except to help delay things, which I think there must be some ethic that these legal people have about not calling out things about motives. Why didn't the Supreme Court take this with the kind of alacrity that they did in those other important cases? And this is just as important as those. And then when the Court of Appeals wrote a absolutely powerful statement of why the Trump position about immunity makes no sense. A decision that was so good, according to the experts, that there's no reason why the Supreme Court had to improve upon it in any way. They could have done it right away. They could have done it as soon as the appeals court handed it up, and then they take a lot of time to come up with this. There is no reason for them to take the case, or if they did take the case, there is no reason why they couldn't have lifted the stay. The whole thing is paralyzed right now. It has been paralyzed. A stay has been keeping the district court, Judge Chutkan, from moving forward. There was supposed to be jury selection that was going to start in a few days. But that's all been put on hold because the Supreme Court has taken all this time to hear a case that isn't worthy. And then after they take the whole time to issue what they did last night, they're saying it's not going to be till April 22nd that the oral arguments are heard. And the people that I was listening to yesterday thought, well, that means that they're probably not going to hand down a decision till the end of their term, which is in late June. And then you got to do a bunch of things. There are a lot of pretrial things, and it becomes people are starting to say, as I see around the web, and the analysts are saying that the prospects of the trial actually taking place before the election are greatly injured. And the idea that there might be a verdict in time for voters to go to the polls knowing what this guy has done, according to a jury of his peers, of average Americans, the probability of actually having a verdict has gone down. The polls have been showing, and I don't know exactly how seriously to take this, because maybe the question is asked in a way that, but it may be really important in terms of some people's thoughts about voting for Trump or not voting for Trump. A lot of people are apparently saying in exit polls from the Republican primaries, a lot of people are saying that it's important to them whether Trump is at that point a convicted felon. I don't know how important it is to them. I mean, if you're really paying any significant attention and you're not in some kind of pro-Trump trance state, we all really should know, without having to hear the formal presentation in court or hear the judgment of the jury. Everybody with decent intelligence who's reasonably well informed should really know that Trump is guilty. I don't need the jury to tell me that. I know that about as well as I've ever known anything in our public life, and I've been a news junkie since I was 10, which is 1956. We know maybe those people, however, don't know and aren't going to know unless a jury tells them this guy's guilty. I just don't know how important it is. But I really do think that I believe in the rule of law. That is part of the major battle we're engaged in, is whether we're a nation where law rules, including nobody is above the law. I mean, but Trump is not only arguing that he's above the law, he is succeeding in placing himself above the law to a degree that is quite distressing. And the Supreme Court yesterday was a big advancement on that. You know, I'm going to talk in a few minutes, if I remember where I'm going, about the extraordinarily dark and corrupt nature of today's Supreme Court. But for right now, let's just say that this Supreme Court has shown itself in this instance to be allied with an obvious criminal who is quite clearly threatening the survival of American democracy. I mean, the election of 2024, this hasn't come into this conversation. We've talked about the election, but among people who are, I would say, in touch with reality here, is getting to be more and more widely understood that the election of 2024 is basically a choice between American democracy surviving and it's being replaced by an authoritarian, I would want to call it a force of fascism. The battle in America today is fundamentally, or about as fundamentally as I'm likely to take it today, about the battle between democracy and fascism. That is not how American politics has traditionally been. There have been marginal elements of that, but our politics have generally been between two forces that have different ideologies about whether to give liberal solutions to our problems or conservative solutions to our problems. But both parties having some vision of a democratic future where America is becoming more the way they think it should be. And Republicans and Democrats have had different views about such things as how much does a society provide a safety net for its people, how much is it going to be individual responsibility, and also how much will the government have the power to regulate the market, or how much will the market be unleashed to do its thing. Those are issues that we fought over all the time. That's not what's happening in America today. And my life's mission, at the center of my life's mission for the last 20 years, is in 2004, I saw that this was going to be the battle, that a fascistic force was rising in America. I never thought it could look like this, but I don't know what I thought it could look like, but I did see this danger, and I've been fighting to help American democracy survive ever since. And we've got several different battlefields to look at. There's Trump claiming immunity. I'm above the law. That's a substantial issue. There's Trump exploiting the judicial system to delay any trial. You know, he claims about his being a candidate, how these legal things are interfering with our electoral process. I think that everybody who watched Trump from Biden's inauguration until Trump declared his candidacy, I think everybody understood. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating. It looked very much like Trump was declaring his candidacy, that he was running for president because that was his best way of protecting himself against the rule of law. He made the argument that it wasn't legitimate to go after him because he was a candidate for president. I think it was a defensive maneuver, and a variety of people were saying that at the time. So here we are. We've got 2 years too late. We got Jack Smith appointed. I have no critique of Jack Smith. He is what the rule of law has needed for a long time. Incidentally, I was so puzzled by Robert Mueller's being such a wimp compared to Jack. We can see what in Jack Smith what was called for in the Mueller investigation. I was completely wrong about Mueller. I thought he was going to be an American hero. I thought he had been dealt a hand, but that was part of this larger battle that's raging in America between, well, for Trump, but not only Trump, and the rule of law. Fascism versus the rule of law, and Trump as being our number one fascist possible leader. The Mueller report came back with basically laying out a blueprint for Trump's impeachment. It showed that he was guilty of, I think, 10 crimes of obstruction of justice. It demonstrated those things. It was kind of weak about the Russian collusion. There were people who thought that that there was sufficient reason to be much more damning than Mueller was about Russian collusion. But in any event, whereas the back in the Nixon time, when the special prosecutor came out with a report, it was clear and explicit about showing the need to impeach this guy because he had committed high crimes and misdemeanors. It was an aggressive document. Mueller left everything kind of implied. And then when William Barr, corrupting the rule of law as an attorney general, turns and spends a month misrepresenting the Mueller findings, that other people were saying, it shows that it's Trump's criminality. But the forces of the rule of law weren't being represented by the attorney general, who I think committed a really serious impeachable offense with what he did with Mueller's report. I mean, people say it was, completely misleading, and it blunted the impact of the Mueller report altogether. Now, why was he so wimpy? This is a guy who went to Vietnam somewhat heroically out of Princeton. A friend of his had died. I mean, he was a fighter. Everybody, when he was appointed, everybody talked about what a great fighter for American justice and what a straight arrow. And he was a Republican. I've never heard, if I were to ever interview Andrew Weissmann, whom I respect enormously, very intelligent, and he was a lead prosecutor for Mueller, I've never heard him answer, ask, or even venture anything related to the question. I would love to ask him, why was Mueller so wimpy? I mean, the force of the rule of law does now have a champion in Jack Smith. He's exactly what the whole side of American democracy should have been for years, as this ugly fascistic force has been rising. Jeez. I, I am still optimistic about where this war is going. I'll get back to talking about some of the lay of the forces, but I'm optimistic because though this has been, I think somebody said that this was the Trump's best day because of the Supreme Court in this his legal battles yet, and the biggest setback for Jack Smith yet. Uh, but I think that the American people, enough of them, already do know enough. I would love for them to be exposed, everybody to be exposed as much as possible to what Jack Smith would have shown and maybe still will. I don't, in Chutkan's court, there'd be national coverage daily. I don't know what the Fox News crowd would ever see from it. There's not an honest journalistic bone in that corporation. You know, they are the allies of the fascist leader, Sean Hannity, the whole gang of them. The way they perpetuated the big lie that led to their being sued successfully for defamation. So I don't know how many people would see how much, but I think enough of America, the American people, see know basically that this MAGA thing, which has become more extreme as Trump has become more extreme, is not what they want. I think they've shown that in the elections of 2022, for example, and in all the special elections. There's a tailwind behind the Democrats right now. And that tailwind has got to do with the rejection of various things that people are seeing about the fascistic force that Trump and the MAGA Republican side represents. The abortion issue is one that everybody says is powerful. I don't know how powerful any of the others are, but I mean, it would be great to have people also not only see what Trump is, but to see the rule of law in its majesty, to see Donald Trump being held to account by the American system of justice. I would like for Americans to witness that. Fortunately, on this big battlefield of Trump versus the forces of the rule of law, there are so many battles that even as Trump gets, Singapore gets overridden by the British, by the Japanese. Even as they see that, we also see that in the civil cases, he's been hit with a financial side is that he owes $500 million plus, and it looks like he's going to have to liquidate some of his properties, and the American people can see the rule of law prevailing there. That is a big deal. And the other thing that's being exposed in those civil cases is that a jury has found that basically that Donald Trump raped this decent woman with his hand, called rape. And the phrase that people are using is he's been an adjudicated rapist. So there's that there. The system of justice is defeating Trump when it gets a chance to have the legal process play out. So Trump is in delay, so that the legal process can't play out. he cannot be held to account. Being held to account happens at the end. I mean, it's playing out in some significant ways. When Jack Smith, in the process, he gets an indictment and he puts out this document which lays out for the American people this magnificent edifice of proof that this guy committed really serious crimes. A greater betrayal than any American traitor has ever had. I mean, Benedict Arnold is, not nearly so ugly and dangerous a kind of betrayer as Donald Trump. And that's being shown in some ways. So that's coming back to the Supreme Court. I don't want to cause people pain when we all have a lot of pain. I mean, everybody who can see what's going on. People I talk to, feel pain to see what we see. But in some ways, though Trump is the urgent problem in this battle between democracy and fascism, between the rule of law that's in the democratic system versus the victory of lawlessness that's at the heart of fascism. This Supreme Court, I think, is the most fascistic, least lawful. It is only, and when I say this, I'm not talking about every justice. I mean, like the three Democratic appointed liberal justices. I'm not including them. I think they can see. I wish that they were more explicit too. I wish that. I think it was Kagan or was it Sotomayor referred to the stench coming from the court if the court were to overturn Roe v. Wade. The word stench was a powerful word which has rebounded through the public discourse ever since. But I think that there's an ethic where the justices are very limited in what they're willing to say about what's going on the Supreme Court, so that when a court like this one, according to what I'm going to argue, really steps over the line into being allied with the opposite of what the actual responsibilities are of a Supreme Court, rather than being applying with integrity the Constitution and the laws and the statutes and whatever else to see what the rule of law requires here and justice. It's just the opposite, that what we have seen from this court is not the Constitution leading to a result or the law leading to a result. We've seen a result of a partisan nature justifying itself with often very bogus pseudo justifications about the law and the Constitution and the history and all that, pretending to be doing the thing that a court's supposed to do, when they're really an extension of the power that got them put on the base. Anybody who's been paying a lot of attention to the way this Supreme Court got built knows that there's a system. The Senator Whitehouse from Rhode Island is he just knows this stuff backwards and forwards. I mean, that's been his job. He shows how this Supreme Court got put together by the plutocracy. I don't know if he uses that word or not. I'll use it. So when, for example, when Donald Trump appointed his three justices, including the one that should never have, Obama should never have allowed to be stolen from him. Again, why the wimps? Why the wimps? The rule of law has had wimps defending it. I've said before that if I had been Obama and they were stealing that seat and refusing to even have hearings to hear Merrick Garland, his nominee, saying we were not interested in any of your nominees. If I had been president and they had used advise and consent as a justification for saying we're not going to consider anybody that the president nominates, even though the Constitution says the president shall nominate. Advise and consent doesn't mean just veto the president's constitutional power. But I had gone to the Supreme Court at that time in 2016. Why the wimps? It's really another one of the deep questions here. I mean, we've got the fascist side, and they're willing to do anything. They'll press the battle in every way. You can't get even getting aid to Ukraine, the most obvious thing, American national security. It shouldn't even be a moment's hesitation about how much do we get for what we're doing if we give them the arms to defeat our main adversary. Shouldn't even be an issue. Why the wimps? Why did Obama complain but not really fight? Why did Mueller take on this job of investigating the most impeachable president we'd ever had or could hardly even imagine? And then come out with this wimpy thing, which doesn't come right out and give the public. I mean, it's all so abstract and sort of like, the lawyers are able to come on TV and say what he's saying, but the public didn't get it from him. He was the one that, it's things like this that make me worry about my optimism, because I really envisioned him as an American hero. I saw him as tackling this terrible, terrible man and bringing him down the way Archibald Cox and Leon Jaworski brought down Richard Nixon, who was not nearly the threat to the rule of law that this guy is. So, out of all the wimpiness of the good guys, the bad guys got this court, and it doesn't behave like a court. For me, the alarm bell went off. I don't know if I should go into these weeds, but they did something with their called shadow docket. Texas passed an anti-abortion law that, on the face of it, I would say, was in violation of the Constitution in two ways. One is the way it sought to evade judicial scrutiny was not kosher. But the other is it basically overturned Roe v. Wade, and the Supreme Court had said in Roe v. Wade and Casey and such things, a right to abortion. It violated what was at that moment the law of the land, because the Supreme Court had said it was the law of the land, and that's what it is until the Supreme Court says otherwise. The rule of law would have had the Texas law stayed because it was unconstitutional at that moment. The Supreme Court did have intentions, apparently, of using a Mississippi case, which is Dobbs, to overturn Roe v. Wade in the next session. But there's no way that it was okay to let that Texas law stand when the case had not even been argued in front of them. The case that would ultimately be argued. I mean, the rule of law says you don't hand down a decision before you hear the evidence. That's Alice in Wonderland stuff. But they let that stand. Where I'm going is that this Supreme Court is a partisan. These are agents of the same force that runs the Republican Party, which is the same force that of which the Federalist Society is a part, which is the same force that put the names of these Republican appointed justices onto a list that they handed to Donald Trump, who didn't know anything about these people, doesn't care anything about these people. He just wants them to do his bidding. And, you know, I had thought that that the court wasn't going to do his bidding. I had argued recently in an op-ed piece, I think validly, that they had ruled against Trump in a variety of situations, that they were not pro-Trump. And I don't think they are pro-Trump. And I'll tell you, what I thought that they, the real power behind the Republican Party is not delighted to have Trump wielding the power over the party that he is. I think we've seen enough evidence, the base is with Trump. But I don't think that the plutocrats that gave us this court and who basically are the driving force in the Republican Party want the party to be run by the likes of Donald Trump. So I don't think that their interests aren't necessarily clean. I think that they think that that Trump creates problems. I mean, I think the Republican Party should be understood as having basically two components. There's the plutocratic component that's been driving this party in a certain direction. The kind of people the Koch brothers, the kind of people who backed Rush Limbaugh, the kind of people who own, Murdoch and News Corp and Fox News and all that. That whole world that gave us George W. Bush and Karl Rove and Cheney in that presidency. You can see them operating, getting their tax cuts and stuff like that. That they created this Republican base. The thing that happened is that another component arose in the Republican Party unbidden. Donald Trump swooped down in 2015, either by luck or by some intuitive understanding, seized the Republican Party away from that force. I mean, they formed a kind of alliance, but I don't think that the party, the force of the Republican establishment, Mitch McConnell is another example of a guy who shows he really would rather have a Republican Party run by people like him, who are not crazy, who are just, want to run this authoritarian fascist power for its own sake kind of regime, but to do it in a more rational, less reckless way. This court is the product of like the Federalist Society and the forces behind the people that Senator Whitehouse has shown bought themselves a Supreme Court. But here they are helping Trump, and I've asked myself. I didn't think they were going to do that. I thought that they were going to throw this back to Chuck fairly well and then they were going to decide a pro-Trump decision that they are not going to use the 14th Amendment to kick him to kick him off the ballot. And I don't believe it would be an honest decision. I think it'd just be a way of um, uh, not so much serving Trump as just staying out of the sights of the violent component of MAGA. But they made it clear that they weren't going to use the power of the court to eliminate the threat of Trump. So some people talk there is going to be a twofer for Trump on the 14th Amendment, against Trump, rejecting his immunity claim quickly and throwing it back to Chuck. Obviously, I was over optimistic, and the other people who were saying this were over optimistic. So why would they help Trump with this delay? What's the benefit if they don't really if they represent a force? These plutocratic partisans that are running the Supreme Court, with a theocratic element thrown in, like Alito, the contemptuous way he overturned abortion, like some kind of grand inquisitor. This court, I'm imagining, has looked at the upcoming election, and it has decided that Trump is going to be the nominee, obviously. I mean, that's been obvious for a very long time. But maybe they've decided that they don't want the other side to prevail in this election, that they want to help Trump get elected because the alternative is Joe Biden. And 4 years more years of Joe Biden presidency, in particular, if Trump gets exposed and the MAGA Republican Party, which is basically running the party. I mean, there's an anti-Trump component in it, but it's obviously a small minority. If the Republican Party were to get blown out in November, not just Trump, but the party that has made itself the unquestioning supporters of this fascist leader who lies, who betrays the nation, if they were to get a blowout that gave the Democrats a sufficient control of Congress, that it would become possible to do a lot that Joe Biden would call for. I mean, he got a lot done in those 2 years when he had control of the Senate, with an asterisk about that, and a House run by Nancy Pelosi, even though that was a really, really difficult Congress for a Democratic president to get anything out of, because of the filibuster, because Sinema and Manchin refused to eliminate the filibuster, even though it was being so terribly abused to allow this fascistic minority to essentially block a constructive Democratic majority from getting anything accomplished. Even with all that, even with everything that, the Build Back Better that had to be scaled back because of the Sinema and Manchin, who abused their situation in a 50-50 Senate, even with such a difficult time that in which the Democrats virtually humiliated themselves with every time Manchin would lead them up to the edge of the cliff and then push them or remove the football like Lucy. Even with all that, in those first 2 years, he accomplished more than any president, I think people are saying, at least since when Lyndon Johnson took office and harnessed the power of the nation, wanting to honor their slain young, handsome president, JFK. Lots of good legislation then. I think that's as far back as it goes. And that would be 1964, 65. Long time. He accomplished a lot. And if he could get in there with a majority big enough that he actually could start asking himself, what do I want to do here? And get things done. I think that the plutocracy, the billionaire class and the corporate system that's behind, say, the Federalist Society that bought this court, I think that they would rather be have the annoyance of having to work through a President Trump. I don't know if they'd be concerned about whether they would get abused and like in Germany in 1933, the big industrialist class thought they could control Hitler. I don't know if Trump. I don't see Trump as being about doing to the industrial class what Hitler did in Germany when he seized more power. So I don't know if they would worry that much about. They're probably right that they can work with him. In his first term, all he accomplished was giving them $2 trillion tax cut, which is completely unjustifiable, even at the wrong time in the business cycle. So he's done really well by the plutocracy, and his main agenda is really just feeding his ego. He doesn't have ambitions to, conquer Europe, like somebody in Germany did. So I think that's what's going on with this court about why they decided to help Trump protect himself through delay from having the American people see he is the most dangerous criminal ever to appear on the pages of American history. They'd rather have him than Joe Biden, and in particular Joe Biden with a workable majority in the Congress that would work with him, as well as all the Democrats did in the House under Nancy Pelosi, and all the Democrats did in the Senate, except for Manchin and Sinema. That would be a real victory for the good guys. And they probably would undo a lot of things that the fascists have accomplished. I mean, what would they do? And one thing they would do, we know that they would pass a bill, a voting rights bill. They tried to do that those first 2 years of Biden, but Manchin and Sinema and the filibuster were enough to prevent that. But the Voting Rights Act is one of the things that this fascist court has made necessary to protect and restore. Now I'm moving again in the direction of exposing that what the Supreme Court did yesterday shows the lawlessness, but we can see that lawlessness in a more comprehensive way. We do have a serious Supreme Court problem that the fascist force owns and controls the Supreme Court. It is not a place where we can go to with the thought that this is how we can protect the rule of law. That's what's supposed to happen at the Supreme Court, but that doesn't happen. It didn't happen even before it got stacked like this 6-3. When they, what was the name of that case? Shelby. It was a case about voting rights, and they basically eviscerated an essential component of the Voting Rights Act, pretending, and this is the dishonesty of the whole thing, they pretended that the reasons for why the Justice Department should review what any of the southern states do that might have the effect of disenfranchising black people, that it have to be reviewed by the Justice Department and approved, because history had shown that there was even after slavery and even after the passing of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, that there was in certain states that had been the Confederacy a real tendency to try to strip black people of their rightful political vote. They knew that, and the court in this decision that it handed down, this is back, I don't know, 10 years ago, before Trump, before it was 6-3, they handed down a decision in which they pretended there's no need for this anymore. They pretended that they were not basically throwing power back from the hands of an oppressed race back into the hands of their oppressors, which is part of the fascist trip in America. They pretended that there was no need, but immediately North Carolina and Texas, two proud states from the former Confederacy, passed the very kinds of laws that eviscerated part of the Voting Rights Act was supposed to protect them from. Similarly, they did the work of the plutocracy almost, like transparently when they did the Citizens United decision. This is, they pretended explicitly, we're opening the floodgates to money entering the political process, but there's no danger here that there will be, power will go to money instead of to the people. I mean, that's exactly what their purpose was. They were doing the plutocrats' work by saying, I think that the principle of democratic justice should make it such that no money, that we apportion money in some way in which it's basically, I say, let's give everybody $100 or whatever coupon, stipend or whatever, to be spent in the electoral process, and no other money be allowed, because if you allow money to come in, then money buys power, and money is not equally distributed in America in these times. Again, in part thanks to the fascist power that passes these tax cuts. There's such wide inequalities of power that much wider than in the America I grew up in. The richest are way richer, and that is really antithetical to what democracy thrives on, and quite consistent with what fascism thrives on. They opened the floodgates to money, and they wrote a decision in which they pretended that there was not going to be any problem of money corrupting the political process, interfering with the democratic justice is quite antithetical to the money problem we have in politics now. I heard Claire McCaskill, former senator from Missouri, talking about just how corrupt the big money is in the whole situation in Congress. $1, one vote is as much the way power is distributed in this country as one person, one vote. That's fascism overtaking democracy. And the court in the Citizens United pretended to be applying the Constitution, whereas it was clearly just acting as an extension of the force that governs the Republican Party. Its abortion decision, I think, could be picked apart and has been picked apart. It is not something which honors the rule of law. For one thing, it contains a fascistic element also, where it says, in our I'm going to interpret, Alito says, I'm going to interpret the Constitution as giving me the right, as a judge sitting on the Supreme Court, to oppose my religious views on everybody. That's less the flavor of fascism and more the flavor of, the Ayatollahs that, again, it's women, interesting, the Ayatollahs that require that women cover their hair, and that whole revolt, revolution, all the rebellion that erupted when this young woman, 22-year-old, was beaten by this moral squad, such as she died of her injuries because her hair wasn't covered. That's the spirit of the theocrat, and I think Alito has an angry, self-righteous, the 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 Spanish Inquisition, a punitive energy. Yeah, I mean, his decision doesn't take into account anything but his own dogma and his contempt, even, and lack of sympathy for the people who might be impacted. I mean, however you might do things, I mean, there's a spirit in that decision. Even if you could imagine overturning Roe v. Wade in a very different spirit, but you can see that Alito is well chosen by the force of fascism to have a seat on the Supreme Court. So we've got the Trump trials, some of which are able to make progress. Alvin Bragg is about to, it looks real certain that the 25th of March, Alvin Bragg is going to begin the trial having to do with the hush money and the attempt to deceive the American people involved with the payoff of the porn star with whom Trump had an affair when his wife had just given birth back in 2005 or something like that. Yeah, how he paid her money in 2016 to keep her mouth shut, so the American people wouldn't learn about what he had done with her. And then falsified his business records to obscure just what was going on. Some people, I mean, I'm really invested in the case that the Supreme Court has just kicked down the road. I still feel sick about that. That's the really, really important one. I mean, here's the guy who basically tried to seize power against the will of the American people. It doesn't get any bigger than that. But these are serious. What Alvin Bragg is going to be prosecuting, with the jury selection starting in a few weeks, isn't just about his sexual behavior. It's not even basically about the sexual behavior. It is Trump committing crimes to interfere with the electoral process. The fact that it was in the context of the upcoming presidential election, and he was doing these things to keep the American people in the dark, that is, the experts that I've heard are saying, not a small thing. Maybe not the most serious crimes in American history, like the ones that Judge Chutkan would be hearing a case about if the Supreme Court had wanted to have justice done. But important, he will be held. I don't see how it's going to get sidetracked, or you can always get a juror who somehow slipped through, who's going to vote to support Trump regardless of what the case shows about his crimes. But I'm from what we've seen before, you can convict Paul Manafort. You know that MAGA Republican woman who voted to convict Manafort because she said, you know, basically she was an honest person. She wanted to. She said it was proved, and she had to do that. She had to vote to convict this guy. And Roger Stone was found guilty. We haven't had jury nullification. The Trump jurors so far haven't been jury nullifiers. I expect he'll be convicted there. So we've got that battlefield of the courts, and we'll see what happens down in Florida, where he's got another justice who has really been grossly aiding Trump in delaying things, even though it's an open and shut case with respect to the documents case, the Mar-a-Lago thing. I mean, they've got Trump dead to right in one way and another. If the case could get heard, uh, no problem showing the guilt. And there's a Georgia case where Trump is battling the rule of law by bringing this smear campaign against Fani Willis. That's what it looks like to me. There's no evidence. In order to disqualify her, you'd have to have evidence of a kind that there's none whatsoever, as far as I can tell. You could, but this was a way of taking her down a peg, weakening her position by showing that she exercised what some people think is poor judgment by having a relationship with this guy that she appointed to be her co-prosecutor. I don't know if it was poor judgment. I don't know that you can't be lovers with somebody and have one and have it get that in the way in any way of your being good teammates and trying to achieve a noble purpose. Some people do say it was poor judgment. I mean, everybody's got a private life, but yeah, if you smear somebody, if you make them look somehow bad, even if it takes false accusations to make them feel bad. The Trump side has always been into false accusations. It's their bread and butter. I mean, that's what the big lie is, and they know that it can work. I mean, that they've discredited in the eyes of some people, like their base, Fani Willis. They'll believe that there's something wrong with her, even though she showed, I think, great skill in bringing the indictments she did. I was looking forward to seeing her do this RICO prosecution. But again, Trump wins, he gets delay. This has taken a lot of time. Even if the judge says she's not disqualified, which is what I expect, you know, they'll also have sullied her and given her less ability to stand up before the microphones and speak the way Letitia James has lately been speaking. She is the voice of justice. She's like Jack Smith. You know, I talk about the wimp factor. There's a column by a former Republican, Jennifer Jones. That dates me. Jennifer Rubin, in Washington Post. I've been reading her closely. She used to be like a Reagan Republican. I didn't like what she had to say, but since she's gone over to the good guy's side, she's been very impressive. Anyway, she mentions Letitia James and describes the way that she very unwimply has represented the forces of the rule of law. And then she ends the piece. I'm kind of excited when she said this, how she would make a great attorney general in a second administration. And I thought, yeah, that woman who's standing up there, sort of radiating a certain kind of almost physical strength, and speaking as the nobody's above the law kind of righteous force, replacing Merrick Garland, who who did the wimpy thing, who was quite willing to go after the foot soldiers, but afraid apparently of going after the generals. The battle between the forces of democracy and the rule of law and fascism. It's all over our landscape. And one of the places where we have lost that battle for the time being and for too far into the future, for my comfort, is the Supreme Court. And that creates a dilemma. I have one important relationship, important to me, I think important to the other person too. Probably more important to me because it's my one place where I'm in conversation of sorts with an important player on the national stage. And I've been communicating with him my belief that if we can, after we survive the battle of Donald Trump versus American democracy in the 2024 election, that it'll be time for the forces of the rule of law to do something about this Supreme Court. There's a dilemma. On the one hand, if you want to represent the rule of law, you want to honor the American tradition that when the court has spoken, you treat that with respect. I mean, for example, think about the scene when the court made this decision in Bush v. Gore in 2000. It was a terrible decision, and it looked terrible. 5 Republican-appointed justices handed the presidency to the Republican nominee, and the 4 Democratic appointed justices voted otherwise to have the Democratic count continue. It looked bad, and it was bad. The politicization of the court, the willingness of the court to function as an extension of the interests of the Republican Party or of the force that runs the Republican Party, already dealt a serious blow to the rule of law. And then things like Citizen United, things like a decision on guns much more recently, which was a perversion of history and law and constitution. Not a good decision, but a Republican decision. If obeying the American ethos of when the court speaks, you abide by it, like Gore did. He stood up after Bush v. Gore, which was a bad decision, and he said, well, I'm an American, this settles it. That's honoring the rule of law. The rule of law would have required that the South not secede until they had established that they had that right. That's how we know that the force of fascism, even back then, was fundamentally lawless. Al Gore honored the court, just like we tend to say, well, we should respect even if you don't respect the man, you respect the office. It's part of protecting American democracy. But what if fascism has already gained control of the Supreme Court? that it's not an adjudicator between the positions of two sides of the issue. It is an instrument of one of those sides, and that one side is basically fascistic. I mean, this is a court that hands more power to the plutocracy in Citizens United. It's a, a, a court that hands more power to the theocratic, oppressive spirit in the Dobbs decision. It's a power that basically embraces a kind of gun absolutism, interpreting the Second Amendment in a way that a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Republican appointed, Warren Burger, said was an absurd way of reading the Second Amendment, but this court enshrined it because it's the Republican position. And it helps keep the American people at each other's throats, which is part of the way fascism is able to gain power in a democratic system. I've had a love of the history of the Supreme Court ever since I took a course in college that was just very exciting. So I learned a fair amount of the court's history. I believe that this court is the most purely partisan court America's ever had, which makes me worried that they're about to hand down a decision that will eviscerate the powers of the federal government's agencies to do the good things that it has been doing in relation to the corporate world. There's some kind of Chevron thing you can look up, which I'm not going to go into. But apparently that's a very dangerous thing. Partisan in a way that, people might say, well, the Warren Court back in the 50s and 60s was partisan too. They handed down all these liberal decisions. I think that's fundamentally different, and it's got something to do with are you serving some ugly force that's one of the partisans embattled in the court process, or are you serving something better than that? I mean, the Warren Court decided things like they overturned in Brown versus the board in 54. They said segregation is not okay. That separate but equal decision that was one of the most scandalous decisions in American history, 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, when they said separate but separate is okay, segregation's okay as long as it's equal, and they knew full well it was anything but equal. It was a regime of racial terrorism. But they overturned it. The Warren Court overturned it in 1954. And Jim Crow South got dismantled. That wasn't for partisan purposes. It wasn't to get Democratic votes. I mean, the Republicans were still the party of Lincoln. It was to serve American values. Likewise, another case that I recall from that course called Gideon versus Wainwright. And it's the decision in which the right to counsel gets expanded. The right to counsel is in the Constitution. They interpret it as meaning you've got the right, if you don't have the money, to have counsel appointed for you. It wasn't a way of getting votes. It wasn't a way of increasing one's partisan power. It was extending the value that's embedded in that piece of the Bill of Rights that says, in the rule of law, we want to make sure that defendants have the advantage of having somebody who knows how to play this process looking out for them. And there are a lot of people in the world that don't have money to get themselves well represented in court. And we don't want them to get convicted simply because they didn't have money. That's not the American concept of justice. So we expand that right in Gideon versus Wainwright. case it just flitted through my mind that, oh yeah, um, there was, I think, a case called Baker versus Carr having to do with changing the way politics worked in some local state kind of districting issues in order to preserve the idea of one person, one vote, um, changing the rules to equalize the voice of different parts of the territory. So it wouldn't be that if you live in this district, you get 3 times as much voice as if you live in that district. That wasn't for a partisan purpose. The Warren Court, as I see it, was continually working to have America achieve more fully its values. That's not what this court is today. They're partisans. Now, we have had partisanship issues in the history of the court before. When the court handed down another one of its most disgraceful decisions ever, the Dred Scott decision in 1857, which basically was written by slaveholders and their sympathizers and contained the sentence, the black man has no rights that the white man is obliged to respect. That was quite partisan. It was the country was moving in the direction of civil war. And that was a decision in which the court used its powers in a terrible, and I don't think very constitutional way. But the difference between the corruption of the slaveholder-dominated court and the corruption of this court is that this court is across the board partisan. I mean, there have been a few decisions that somewhat surprisingly have not been so clearly Republican. I think that they're treading with a certain amount of caution. This is just my interpretation. They're not. They know that the prestige of the court has taken a major hit. Somebody on TV yesterday said they've never seen the prestige of an American institution plummet so far so fast. Like 40% loss of support in the American public in terms of, I don't know how the American people are seeing them, but the lack of support, I think, entitles the forces against this, the anti-fascist force, Antifa, to be more aggressive about going after this force. That this court that's become a fortress of fascism. I think we can afford to be more. Yeah, I don't like the idea of attacking the court. I don't know exactly what ways they should be attacked. Some people talk about appointing more people. The ethics thing is just a sign of the corruption. It's not really the problem. I mean, okay, let's pass some ethical rules and not leave the court to police itself so much. But that's not really the problem. The problem is, even if they weren't going off on the junkets that these corrupt men have been going on, even then, they would be the opposite of what a court is supposed to be. I mean, these are individuals who've got some kind of corruption in them of a personal kind, but what they represent more dangerously is the corruption of a fascist force that's trying to seize control of America. So we got to go after them in some ways, and we can, there's that court packing idea, which, has got its major pitfalls. But I think at the very least, what's called for now, or after the Trump versus the rule of law has been resolved, I hope successfully, in November, and with a inauguration of Joe Biden in January. After that, to at least to begin to raise the alarm as forcefully, non-wimpily, no wimping anymore. You know, before I decided I was going to talk about this battle we've got between Donald Trump and the rule of law, and between the Trump party and the rule of law, and between fascism, democracy and fascism, I was planning to talk about. I had one topic that I was thinking of. I might do it sometime. The one kind of both sidesism that I'll tolerate. I've had a lot of people over the years, when I've been trying to raise the alarm about what's been rising on the right, who will talk about things in a very both sides way. I mean, that's become a word in the American language, both sidesism. In which an equivalence is declared between the Republicans this and the Democrats that. That both sidesism fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the political battle in America today. It's not. There's not a symmetry of Republicans and Democrats. What there is a serious asymmetry. The only reason that this force has been able to gain so much power over the last 30 couple years, I mean, that's when I trace the process, is because of the failure of the other side of the political divide to respond to that challenge the way it needed to be responded to, when it needed to be responded to. Didn't fight for the hearts and minds of of Rush Limbaugh's audience, is one thing I often talk about. I had liberal gatekeepers saying Limbaugh's audiences aren't our concern. I was trying to get a bigger platform for my own radio work. They were our concern. The wimpiness factor, in a sense, the failure to see what was taking over the right, and the failure to fight it. And those are two different sets of failures. The wimpiness thing, the two-sided asymmetry is captured in a famous line of William Butler Yeats. The good lack all conviction, while the evil are filled with a passionate intensity. And so that wimpiness that we've talked about, Letitia James not being a wimpy, Jack Smith not being wimpy, that's what we need now. That's what we need in going after Trump and the Trump party between now and November. That's what we need in showing the American people the fascist lawlessness represented by the other side. But that wimpiness has been a problem. And what you've got is a kind of polarization. I haven't really entirely figured out how this happens. But if you compare the Republican Party and the Democratic Party with their predecessors, let's say go back to FDR or Eisenhower or whatever, and you look at those two parties, and then you compare them as we come out of the first Bush presidency, and you watch a dynamic show up. The two parties have changed. The Republican Party has developed the defect of becoming completely amoral. It becomes possessed by a spirit of sociopathy. It will do anything. we know that Newt Gingrich, who was somebody who could do pretty much anything, like the way he would he could get self-righteous about what Clinton did, and only later did we find out he was doing even much worse, of the very same kind of sexual misbehavior as he was condemning so self-righteously. I mean, he was a sociopath. He is a sociopath. That was not the Republican Party before. And at the same time as they become sociopathic, they become really single-minded in the pursuit of power. Like, do anything to get power. Like, insatiable about getting power. So it moved from a political force where, well, everybody's always trying to get some power, but a lot of good people have in their minds that they want the power, and they want to spend a fair amount of time using that power to get something good accomplished. That became less and less true of the Republican Party. So you got a party that is only interested in fighting for power. So it makes a fight over everything. It is aggressive at every point, and it is morally bankrupt. That wasn't true of the Republican Party in the America I grew up in. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party is becoming like the photographic negative of that. It was a party that wasn't morally bankrupt. It stood for all the good things. I mean, since the other parties basically being destructive at every turn, that's part of the nature of fascism. You can't really readily find that they do or say anything that makes the world better. Almost everything they do makes the world worse. But that base by itself compels the other party, its photographic negative, to be fighting for things that are good. So it becomes the party of the rule of law, it becomes the party of democracy, it becomes the party of compassion and racial justice, and it becomes a party of truth against the lie. Oh, wow. But something else is going on in it, and it's just the opposite of the Republican Party, who are willing to make a fight over everything. Their photographic negative version on the other side is not willing to fight really over anything. So you get. I mean, I don't really understand why somebody like Robert Mueller, who is a Republican, seems to have been afflicted with the same disease. That's why I'd like to ask Weissman, what the hell happened there? Why wasn't he like Jack Smith? But I make a history of this. If you go to my YouTube channel and do a search for the word weakness, I go through a long history of how the liberal democratic good guy side in this emerging battle has consistently displayed a pattern of weakness. Obama did not go to the Supreme Court to fight against what Mitch McConnell and the Republican senators were doing, stealing a Supreme Court seat. I heard somebody say, if things had unfolded differently at that point, what's his name? What's the name of the guy who died in February of 2016? The Italian name, but not Alito. Names get to be difficult. But, the guy who he died suddenly and in February, and Obama had, almost a whole year, most of a year to replace him. If it had been played differently, you would have had a 6-3 liberal appointed majority versus what we got now. When you're wimpy, there is a cost, and the Democrats have been consistently wimpy. We should see the big battlefield in which there's the immediate battles. The battle over maybe getting that terrible judge down in Florida was Aileen Cannon, getting her replaced. Oh, that's one of the battles because she's delaying things. We're not going to see that trial before the election. All these different battles to see whether Trump will be able to be held accountable. Also, whether Trump will be able to essentially defeat the rule of law. And whether the American people will be able to see that their choice is between democracy and fascism, which is also to understand that the rule of law requires that Trump be held accountable and that he not be given the powers of the presidency. All these battles are taking place. But the fundamental battle is this thing that's been waging at many different places at different times. And yesterday's Supreme Court decision is one important move to help Trump in his attempts to evade being held responsible, to defeat the rule of law. And then if we can win that battle, what do we do about the Supreme Court? Back to that issue. I think that we have to find a way to simultaneously enshrine our commitment to the idea of the rule of law and the Constitution with exposing that this Supreme Court does not represent the rule of law. It represents an extension of the same force that's been threatening us in so many ways, widening our inequalities, disenfranchising vulnerable groups, interfering with our responding responsibly against climate change, interfering with our joining it with the great alliance that Joe Biden created of the democracies of the West to protect the democracy in Ukraine from the ugly fascistic invasion by the dictator who rules Russia. All those things are at stake here, and to point out that the Supreme Court is a part of that picture, that its decisions have been partisan, that it is not an arbiter of the rule of law, it is an enemy of the rule of law because it is abusing the role of the Supreme Court. And that therefore, then if the public can be persuaded of that, to start talking about how do we go from here to there. And again, I don't know what the right way is, but we need to have a public relations campaign to get the American people motivated toward envisioning how do we get from here to there, and then to propose whatever the best proposals would be of how we avoid being subject to a fascistic, dishonest, corrupt Supreme Court for a generation or more. In the name of the Constitution, we've got to take on this Supreme Court, a court that showed us anew what a terrible thing it has become when it abetted Donald Trump's attempts to defeat the rule of law and to evade being held accountable and to prevent the system of justice from affirming that basic American principle that no one is above the law. So I guess I'll stop here. This all can be seen in a even larger framework. The battle between democracy and fascism in America really can be seen as part of a global struggle that's going on. And you can go to my website, abetterhumanstory.org, search on the word fascism, and you'll see that laid out. This is a global battle, and it hasn't been going all that well for democracies in the last 20 years, 20 some. And the battle between democracy and fascism can be seen in a still larger picture. It is the present manifestation of a battle that's been raging in the human world since the rise of civilization. If you go to my website, abetterhumanstory.org, you will see that I believe that I can pretty well prove that when our species took the unprecedented step onto the path of civilization, we unleashed a destructive force, inevitably, that arose because of the systemic structure that we had plunged ourselves into, and not because it was a reflection of human nature. Any species that took that step onto the path of civilization would have unleashed such a force. I believe that I can show that, and that it has really major implications. And that the battle that we're engaged in between democracy and fascism is an extension of a battle between that destructive force and a more whole force that's been going on since the beginnings of our species leaving the niche in which we evolved biologically and evolving this new life form, unprecedented in the 3.5 billion year history of life, the civilized society. We need to look at what it was we left, which was an order, and look at what it was that we inadvertently created by taking an unprecedented step into an unprecedented situation, which is a disorder. And that disorder I show. If you go to my website, you'll see that disorder meant that for millennia, we, as the civilization creating species, we're going to have to deal with this battle between a coherent force that consistently makes things worse in the human world and a coherent force that consistently works to make things better. And what we're engaged in here in America is that a version of that battle. The democracy is the best recipe that we've been able to come up with about how do you make a human world in which things could be made better, like people can live lives that are better than the lives that people live in fascistic dictatorships or any other kind of tyranny. That battle is something that we actually can see how it unfolds in history. And so I won't say more about it here. I just want to promise you that I can show that there's considerable validity to that, and that we can see that our present political battle, with the kind of polarization that we've seen, can constructively be understood in terms of a battle between the better and the worse, between essentially a coherent force that makes things better and a coherent force that makes things worse. And I say, if you can show the existence of such coherent forces and show that they are embattled, you have essentially shown that there is a battle at the center of our human drama between good and evil. And I claim that I can show that in a perfectly secular way, just looking at the evidence and drawing rational conclusions. The rule of law that is seeking to hold Trump accountable is trying to establish that indeed we live in a society in which there is not a power above the law, that no one is above the law, that the law governs. That is the recipe for a good human world, not tyranny. The Supreme Court has shown itself to be on the wrong side of that very basic issue. Thank you. I may be back. If I am, I hope you'll tune in. If you've heard part of this, I hope you'll find the whole of this on YouTube. I've tried to create a kind of map in which the particulars of the events make sense in terms of the larger drama in America and in the international arena and in human history. We are called to win this battle. I think understanding it, the more fully we understand it, the more empowered we'll be to win it. If you can see the battlefield clearly, you will deploy your forces more wisely. Thank you.